Acting Speaker. I rise to support the motion moved by the member for Fowler, and I congratulate him on it. His motion states that this House, number one, notes that on the 16th of May 2013, two young activists, Nguyen Phong Nguyen, aged 21, and Dinh Nguyen Ka, aged 25, were sentenced to 6 and 8 years respectively in jail by the People's Court of Long An Province in the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. 1B, the two activists were arrested for distributing literature protesting against China's claims to the Paracel and Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. And 1C, there are credible reports from various international agencies of continuing human rights violations in Vietnam, which is evidenced by the high number of house detentions and imprisonment for people engaged in activities as basic expressing views contrary to the Vietnamese government. And 2, calls on the Australian government to A, refer the matters of Nguyen Phong Nguyen and Dinh Nguyen Ka and other issues concerning human rights in Vietnam that have been raised in the Australian Parliament to the next round of the Australian-Vietnam Human Rights Dialogue, and B, continue to take appropriate steps to convey to the Vietnamese government that Australia expects Vietnam to honour its obligations under the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. Speaker, although Vietnam's economy has made many great strides over recent years, its record on human rights remains extremely poor. Today, the socialist government of Vietnam virtually suppresses all forms of political dissent using a broad array of repressive measures. Freedom of expression, association, and even public assembly are tightly controlled. Religious activists are harassed, intimidated, and imprisoned. The criminal justice system lacks independence and operates under the direction of the government and the Socialist Communist Party. Vietnam's authoritarian penal code prohibits public criticism of the government and the Vietnamese Communist Party. We know in 2012 at least 40 people were known to have been convicted and sentenced to prison for merely peaceful dissent, an increase on the number from 2011. And in the first 5 months of this year, we have seen more than 50 people convicted in political show trials, more than the number of the entire 2012. Speaker, which brings us to the case of Nguyen Phong Nguyen and Dinh Nguyen Ka. Nguyen Phong Nguyen, at just 21 years of age, was a student at Ho Chi Minh University, Food University. The police arrested her on the 14th of October 2012 in Ho Chi Minh City and took her to the police station without even informing her family. Her family and friends then launched an extensive search for her by making inquiries at that very police station and alerting the public via non-state channels, including the BBC and Radio Free Asia. But it was not until 8 days later, that after she'd gone missing, that an officer at that police station told her mother that she'd actually been transferred to the police in Long An Province. And on the 23rd of October, the Long An police acknowledged that she had been charged with, quote, conducting propaganda against the state under Article 88 of Vietnam's penal system. And according to the indictment, Nguyen Phong Nguyen was officially arrested on the 19th of October, leaving her 5 days with her whereabouts unaccounted for by officials. Now, her mother claims on a visit on April the 26th, she saw many bruises on her daughter's neck, her upper chest and her arms. Her mother said that she told her that she was beaten and kicked severely in the stomach by guards in detention. And it was only when she fainted that the prison guards stopped the beating and took her to see a doctor. Speaker, following these sentences, the Director of Human Rights Asia Watch noted, and I quote, putting people on trial for distributing leaflets critical of the government is ridiculous and shows the insecurity of the Vietnamese government. Writing things that do not please the government is only a crime in a dictatorship. Vietnam should stop using politically controlled courts to convict critics of the government. And Speaker, the US Embassy has also issued a strong statement last month in light of these sentences handed down. It said, and I again quote, "We are concerned by a Vietnamese court sentencing of Dinh Nguyen Ca to 8 years prison and Nguyen Phung Nguyen to 6 years in prison on subversion charges. These convictions are part of a disturbing trend of Vietnamese authorities using charges under national security laws to imprison government critics for peacefully expressing their political views. These actions are inconsistent with the right of freedom of expression and thus Vietnam's obligation under the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights and commitments reflected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We call on the government to release prisoners of conscience and allow all Vietnamese to peacefully express their political views." Speaker, that is the message from the US Embassy. Speaker, this is not the only case. I was very glad to hear the member for Holt raise the case of the Roman Catholic priest Nguyen Van Lai, also known as Father Thaddeus, who was detained for what's so-called spreading propaganda against the state. So, Speaker, what incentives are there currently for the Vietnamese socialist government to make changes to improve their human rights on record? It's all very well for us to come in here and make these well-intentioned notions, but we have to back it up with action. Speaker, it's worthwhile noting that as we're sitting here speaking in favour of this motion, our government today is giving $160 million to the very same Vietnamese government we are criticising to build a bridge across the Mekong River. Now, I'm sure this bridge will facilitate trade and economic growth in that region. But what message, Speaker, are we sending when our nation borrows $160 million that we don't have and gives it to the Vietnamese government? How can that Vietnamese government take motions like this seriously when we're giving such generous gifts? And of course, Speaker, as we gift $160 million to build up Vietnam's heavy infrastructure, this leaves the Vietnamese government free to spend their money elsewhere. So it's no surprise, Speaker, that what we have seen over recent years is a massive increase in Vietnamese military spending. Vietnam already spends more on defence as a proportion of GDP than all its other Southeast Asian neighbours, of course except Singapore. We know in December 2011, Hanoi signed contract with Russia's Defence Export Agency for 2 additional Gerald corvettes. This follows the acceptance of the last of the 2 of the last 4 patrol boats in October, and confirmation was provided by senior Vietnamese military officials in mid-2011 that Hanoi had ordered 6 Kilo-class submarines and has begun to take delivery in 2013-2016, as well as ordering 12 Sukhoi Su-30 MKK fighter aircraft. Speaker, these advanced fighter aircraft, Soviet-made fighter aircraft, cost $30 million a pop. So, Speaker, rather than our government give the Vietnamese government $160 million to build a bridge, why don't we simply cut out the middleman and give them 5 Soviet fighter aircrafts instead? Speaker, if we're going to be serious, we have to make a very loud voice against what the Vietnamese government is doing. And sometimes with our foreign aid programs, we just cannot do it and isolate the two. But in the remaining time, I'd also like to commend the comments from the member for Cowan, who commented on the enormous contribution that the Vietnamese community have made to Australia through their entrepreneurial culture. One can only wonder if the socialist government of Vietnam, to get the best economic advancement for that country, it must protect human rights, it must guarantee freedom of speech, and if it can release the entrepreneurial spirit that we have seen from the Vietnamese community, Speaker, the country of Vietnam has a great future. But it will not do that while it continues to suppress human rights, while it continues to suppress free speech, and while it continues to suppress religious liberty. Speaker, we owe it to the people of Vietnam, to our local Vietnamese community, to use our voice as loud as we can to express our outrage against these violations against the Vietnamese government.
I thank the Honourable